So let's get cracking with today's session. I'm sure a few more people will join. As I say, this is one of our most registered sessions. I think we've had over 350 leaders register for today's session. And so it's wonderful to see people like you, some familiar names, first of all. Hello, and it's wonderful to see you, but also some new names. And so it's wonderful also to be able to get you engaged with this topic and with Champion Health and everything that we stand for. Now, the reason why we've put on this session is quite simply because we've listened to you. We've listened to you in that you said that we want mental health training for leaders, and we know the importance of leadership mental health training. Now, whilst the bottom up within our organisations does have a big influence on our mental health and the boots on the ground, we know that the tone is set right from the very top. And it gives permission to our team to be able to talk openly about mental health and really to deliver that open culture of psychological safety going forwards. So I can see the chat has absolutely popped off. So if I missed anyone, good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are joining. Now, one thing I would love to mention to you today is just some breaking news, first of all. And so we're going to have a little drum roll. So I don't think we've got any sound effects for today. But on Friday evening, Champion Health became a NASDAQ listed company as part of the PhysiTrack group. Now, starting from humble beginnings with myself and my co-founder, Ricky, 4 years ago, we're now working with global organisations from global banks, law firms, and incredible organisations such as the NHS. And this is now the next step for us, being able to increase our impact as a mission-driven organisation for people like you and people in your organisation as well. So some really exciting news that we're now alongside Apple, Google, I should say Alphabet or Amazon, for example. And we're now on the NASDAQ markets, which is absolutely incredible to say. And I'm so proud of what the team have done to be able to get us there. Now, what I'd love to just share is what this means for you, first of all, as Champion Health members and as part of our community. The first thing is that we're looking to combine reactive and proactive services. So whilst we have this Netflix of wellbeing that many of you are familiar of and the personalized platform, we're also now looking to join in physiotherapy, psychotherapy, online GP and other services to truly make it that one place for well-being for our teams, so we don't have to manage all of these logins and all of that headache that goes alongside it. The second thing is there will be more sessions like this with more leaders in the space talking about what we can do to be able to not only benefit ourselves and our own mental well-being, but our team as well. There'll be more workplace guides, and that's a big factor that we look to launch a load of guides, loads of research to be able to support people like you, as well as accessing the world's best academics to being able to improve that Netflix of wellbeing and the personalization. So just wanted to share that with you to begin with. And it's huge news for us and it's huge news for you as well, and what we can do together going forwards. So in today's session, mental health training for leaders. Now, when we were putting together this training course, we were thinking about just doing it around mental health specifically. But what we realized very quickly is the importance of culture when it comes to mental health. And that can often be ignored when it comes to really building positive mental well-being in the workplace. So that's the first place that we're going to start on today's session, is how we can build and maintain a culture of positive mental well-being at work. And again, we've got a few exercises to run through in today's session. We'll also then talk about how we can improve and maintain our own mental well-being as leaders. I spoke to many of you before the session. I asked, what is it that you'd really like to get out of it? And that was one of the key things, is how can we be the role models that our team can aspire to be and can really get behind to build that healthy culture. And so improving and maintaining our own mental well-being is going to be a big focus that we'll share with you today. And the final thing is, we can't prevent everyone from struggling. Inevitably, there are going to be stresses and strains across our team and across our team's lives. And so we are going to share with you today how we can support colleagues that may be struggling, how we can signpost them, how we can listen effectively and be the best leaders that we can possibly be to reach our potential and reach our organisation's potential. And the final element within here is we have utilised research from the University of Cambridge, LSE and the University of Oxford. And I know quite a few people from these organisations have joined today. So a big warm welcome to you as well. Now, what I would love as well, I can see the chat function popping off, which is absolutely wonderful. If you've got any comments, if there's anything that you want to share, any personal experiences as a leader yourself that's worked really well or something that may not have worked well, we would love to hear from you to make it as interactive as possible. So I'm your host on today's session, a slightly different session where I'm not hosting a panel where I'm going to deliver a keynote for 45 minutes or so, and then we are going to have 50 minutes of Q&A at the end, so we can make it really tailored to you and as impactful as possible. As you can see here, I'm the co-founder and CEO of Champion Health. I'm really excited to go through today's session with you and would love to connect with you if I'm not already on LinkedIn. So the first area is around building and maintaining a culture of positive mental health at work. And the first thing to recognise is that workplace has a huge impact, good and bad, on our well-being, and it's equal really to our home environment. We spend a third of our lives statistically at work. For some of you that might be daunting, for some of you, and I really hope this is the case, that's exciting, that we can impact the world and we can have a positive impact on society. We spend a third of our lives at home, and it's really important. We're going to talk about that inevitably we are humans, we're not robots. We will bring stresses and strains outside of the workplace into the workplace. Then we should spend a third of our lives asleep as well, and sleep's going to be a big focus around looking after our own mental well-being. And I've seen a lot of research at the moment and a lot of anecdotes around line managers and leaders having as much of an impact, if not more, on our health and well-being than our own doctors. Now, again, I really want you to flip that away from something that's quite anxiety provoking, which it could be for many of us, to something that, what a great opportunity this is to help people around me and help our most important asset, that of course is our people, and to build cultures of high performance, of sustainability through high levels of well-being. So it's a really important thing to recognize the role that we do play directly or indirectly on our teams lives, and also on our own lives within here. So again, when we were planning this session, we were looking at, do we need to establish the business case? We know the business case, we know that it's absolutely vital, and that's why you're here today. We know the moral case and why it's the right thing to do. So let's get cracking with how we can do this today, so you can take at least one thing away from today's session. And that's all I ever ask of these sessions. You take one thing away and you can implement it going forwards. So the first thing to know is that culture and well-being have a bi-directional relationship. Often we can sometimes see well-being over here and culture over here. They're interlinked, and actually they're really two of the same thing. The culture within our organizations, how we feel within our organizations, how we interact with our people, that ties into how then our perceived well-being is, our mental health, our physical health, and likewise that then impacts the culture going forwards. And what I'd like to just do is actually rip this slide up. I'm sorry, Alex, for who put this together for me today. And I'm going to say it's actually a tri-directional relationship with productivity and performance in the bottom left corner, culture at the top, and well-being in the bottom right. Because our productivity and performance, and this is often overlooked, does lead to feelings of positive well-being, because if we're productive, if we're performing, if we're having an impact upon society, that's going to lead to really positive feelings of high levels of well-being. We're going to be growing as the company grows, and a good company often that's performing has a better culture. Sometimes when the company is underperforming, we may be underperforming, that will have an impact on the culture. We may be snappy with individuals, that's then going to impact well-being, and that only just goes round again in that cyclical process. So that's a really important thing to recognize, is that there are things inside our control and outside of our control, but these things do really talk to each other and they don't sit in silo. So culture, well-being and performance are really interlinked all throughout here. And I really wanted to recognize that for you as leaders on this call and line managers, you might be, we've got CEOs on this call through to line managers, it's hard. It's a really hard role. We do need to be switched on a lot of the time, and that's a really big thing that we're going to talk about, is how to switch off effectively and being able to take those breaks and make sure we're sustainable with our productivity. But it is also a privilege in a lot of ways, and the more we can see it as a privilege, the more that we will be the best leaders that we can possibly be. Now, we do have to make tough decisions at times and regularly. I have to make 3 tough decisions on a daily basis, I've calculated on average, and I think that's fairly common across leadership teams as well. We have to role model, and that's something that I work on really hard, and I don't always get it right. But if we say, okay, the culture here and the expectation is to work 9 till 5, but we do not reply to emails afterwards, then I need to do that myself. For other organizations, you might adopt a more flexible approach. And again, it's talking about taking those breaks with your team, for instance, that are really important for them building that culture of positive mental well-being. But also as a leader, we are supporting those people around us. And at any given time, again, if we're a line manager, if we're a CEO, we will be supporting people inside and outside of the workplace. And people will look to us as role models within here. So it is a hard thing, but it's also a privilege that we can impact people around us. And I think that's a really positive outlook on something that is a big challenge within our day-to-day lives and also feeds a lot of pressure into us. So just for a moment, I mentioned there's going to be a quick activity. So for those of you that's just joined, good to see you first of all. I asked people at the start of the session if they could just get a pen and paper. And what I would love you to do is just write down the characteristics that your worst teacher had. What characteristics did they display? You can do this in the chat. The more of you that can do it in the chat, the better. So we can read them out and see if there are any themes popping up within here. The second thing that I want you to do is then think about the best teacher at school, at university, college. What did the best teacher have? What characteristics did they display? What was it that really got you up and out of bed in the morning? What made you a high performer within their classroom, for example? What made you feel really comfortable around them? So just two examples, the worst teacher and the best teacher. If you can pop it in the chat, Adam, I can see you're on the chat as well. So Jess has mentioned empathy, fantastic. Worst is never allowed to have a voice or express ourselves. Will has mentioned dismissive, best interested. Michaela, relatable, fantastic. Not invested, and Neil mentions interested as well. So we're getting a really key theme throughout here. We've got Jill, I'm trying to keep up with it all popping off, so not being able to be wrong, that's a huge area we're going to talk about shortly. Lauren, less patience. Sally Ann, Yeldon was always late, best interested, that's a common theme. Worst, lack of respect and anger, best fair, from Alex within there. Sylvia's mentioned worst, judgmental, best approachable. So we're getting a really strong theme through here, that this is exactly what we find from the research. And what I want you to do is now actually just think, am I that person when it comes to the best teacher that I could possibly be? So on the next slide, we've broken down from the research what your best teacher probably had within there. And so met your needs and requirements and understood your challenges. So we've got that all within here. Ruby's just mentioned empathetic, approachable, shows interest, made things fun and used humor within here, knew the boundaries, and with the boundaries, they were consistent in what they said. My best teacher personally was the strictest person I think I've ever met, but they were consistent with it. But they used fun and humor to be able to break down that sort of tough shell that they did have and making sure that we didn't mess around in class. Non-judgmental, and Jess mentioned judgmental within here, so that's one of the key themes as well. And also I've seen a lot of people saying freedom to express ourselves, being interested within us. And that's really now the contract that I want you to make for yourself is you can now be the leader that your teacher was. So everything that you've written down on paper or in the chat, that's your personal contract to being the best leader possible going forwards. And actually on the flip side, the worst leader, so being judgmental, picking on individuals, lack of respect, anger, inconsistency, they're the things that we want to steer away from. Now, again, we are human beings. I don't get it right all of the time, and I'm not a robot by any stretch of the imagination. We need to be authentic and human. That will lead to mistakes. But the more that we can stick to that contract that we've just written down, the better leader we can be to being able to support our team. And everything that we've just mentioned really is psychological safety. And I apologize for the awful phonetics that Alex added in within here. It did give me a little chuckle. But psychological safety is a really important thing within our organizations. And this is really the belief that you won't be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or even making mistakes. And what we know is the highest performing organizations across the world, and Google did a study called Aristotle. So Alex, if you can dig that out and post it on the chat, that would be wonderful. They were psychologically safe spaces. So places where you could fail, you weren't covering things up, you weren't pointing the finger. I've heard an amazing phrase of don't point the finger, point the thumb. And so that's something that I've utilized, as cheesy as it is, and as much as I sound like David Brent when I say that. But psychological safety is absolutely vital within here. And so the more psychologically safe that we can be, the environment, the culture can be, and we can really harness that, the more high performing our teams will be, the longer they will stay for, the more they're going to really be engaged with the workforce, and our organizations will thrive within here. So this is the most important thing I believe that Champion Health have got right, is being able to build a culture of psychological safety where it's safe to fail from time to time. That's okay. We learn from our mistakes, of course, but we're open and we're able to bring our whole selves to work. So going on to the second section within here, What else do the best leaders possess in optimal culture? So again, looking at the 9 most important factors according to the research, and we were working tirelessly through this to be able to narrow it down to 9, because it could be 30 and we could deliver an 8-week course on this. So in the next 15 minutes, I'm going to share with you the 9 most important factors according to the research. One thing to note, so you avoid developing RSI from scribbling them down very quickly, is this session is recorded as well and will be sent through to you afterwards. So the first thing is understanding human psychology. I believe the best leaders are actually human psychologists. They know what gets us up out of bed in the morning. We know how to motivate people. We understand that people are human. I'm going to go on to that in a moment's time. And it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. For me, sometimes I need to be shown a little bit of tough love to be able to really perform at my peak. For other people, actually, it needs to be a very different approach. For some people, it's a ruthless approach. For others, it's compassion. And you can have ruthless and compassion together. But for what we really need to understand is what makes people tick within our teams, what gets them up and out of bed in the morning, and utilizing that within our teams and on an individual basis. The second thing is then, and I've mentioned this already, that humans aren't robots. Robots and technology is artificially intelligent, and humans are emotionally intelligent, definitely on the most part. And that's why robots will never take away human jobs when emotional intelligence is required. That gut feel that we have, the empathy that we can show, the compassion and the cognitive function that humans have is second to none. And what we want to recognize is that emotional intelligence piece, and really looking at EQ rather than IQ. Because when we start to hire EQ and when we start to really nourish and celebrate EQ, and that's emotional intelligence, that's when our people can thrive. That's when psychological safety is there. And that's when your team will go from here to here in terms of their performance, but also their well-being and that psychological safety of feeling part of something and bringing, again, their whole selves to work, recognizing that we're all individual and we're all in our own unique boats. We all face our own unique challenges, and we all have our own unique wants and needs as well. So that's a really important factor that the best leaders do possess. The third element is then no one starts in the same place. And I'll be honest with you right now, I got this wrong. For the first year probably of starting out Champion Health, I used to think, well, I can do this, why can't other people do it? And then I saw people that were doing things that I couldn't do, and I felt a low sense of self-worth until I understood that we all start in different places. We're all going on our own unique journey. We've all had our own unique upbringing. We all have our own unique genetics, and I can keep going on and on and on. Some people may be having challenges with divorce. Other people may be in really healthy relationships. Some people may be worried about job security within a certain department, and that could just be due to luck. Other people could be in a department that's thriving, their job secure. And so it's a really important thing that I recognized, first of all, was that the moment that I could start to realize that people started in different positions, some people had a leg up, and I've had a lot of legs up, and recognizing my privilege is a really important thing. The more I started to recognize why some people may struggle in different areas where I could cope with it, and also the areas that I struggle with, why other people can cope with it as well. So the moment that I understood this, my leadership really started to improve, and I started to really understand people and that human psychology that we mentioned at the start as well. The fourth element is then consistency, and I think this is probably the most important point. It's really hard to narrow it down into one, but the best leaders from what I see are consistent in what they do. They don't say one thing and do something else. They do exactly what they say they're going to do and deliver on it. And if they don't deliver on it, they put their hands up and they apologize to people off the back of that and say, I made an error, I'm only human, and this is what I'm going to do to rectify it going forwards. We're going to talk about communication in just one moment, because that's such an important thing for our team's well-being, for our team's anxieties, and anxiety is a future focus thing that many people experience, and actually everyone in the world experiences from time to time. But the consistency of what we say and what we deliver is absolutely vital within here. And I'm sure there are times where you've seen it done not so well, that someone has said something, they've not delivered on it, and they've maybe swept it under the carpet. Think about how that's made you feel as an individual. But if we can be consistent in our messaging, that's an absolutely vital thing to being able to then get our team on board and our team's level of trust. And again, trust is something that I'm going to go through to around what Simon Sinek says. Now, the next point is around clarity of communication. And this ties into the consistency. So consistency of communication, but be extremely clear in our communication as well. Now, we want to communicate in multiple ways. Face-to-face is always a great way, but for many of us, we may not be able to do that. So at Champion Health, we have an 8:45 till 9 o'clock call with specific departments to be able to just communicate with them, to understand their challenges, to being able to just have a quick chat. We also have at 4:30 a catch-up on a Friday, just to recap the week and to celebrate each other's successes and to announce anything, to make sure everyone's aware of it. So we work in a really agile way within there. Town halls can be very important, but what we want to avoid is the more traditional corporate communications within here. We want to be human again, and that's a really important thing that we can then start to really get on a level with our team. Now, the communications are vital as well, that we are the first people to communicate to the rest of our team, because rumours, they can spread like wildfire. Things can then be taken out of context, and things can then lead to high levels of anxiety, might lead to people leaving, or it might lead to people underperforming throughout the organisation and leading to poor mental health. As we mentioned, that culture piece, that wellbeing piece ties in clearly and together as well. Now, the second thing is that we will make decisions. I've made decisions, and if Alex takes himself on the camera, I'm sure he'll nod his head, that I've made decisions that the team occasionally may have disagreed with. We do look to involve the team within our decision-making process, but we can't always go ahead with the outcome that they want to. That's just an unfortunate reality. And so the most important thing, though, is that when I've not then justified why we've gone down a different route and why we've chosen a different outcome, the team have then said, well, I don't know why you've done that. And that's when trust can start to erode. When we've started to justify why we've done what we've done, they will start to respect you. They will start to understand, okay, I can see the rationale behind that. Now we're all going to go in the same direction. And that's a really key thing, is that you're all heading in the same direction. And that's the importance of communications within here. Now, when it comes to communication as well, look at utilizing video communications as much as you can, because again, it brings in that human element. Email comms, people click on, things can be misinterpreted when they're read. We really want to utilize video communications. And one of the best things that we've done at Champion in the early stages is hire a head of video to being able to support with that, not just with our members, but internally as well. So I'd really encourage you to look at that. The next element is around laughter and making work fun. And it's a little bit cliche. And of course, if you're on the phones all day, for example, it's harder to make work fun. But I'm going to give you one example of how we made something that's quite stressful, something that may not be too enjoyable, quite fun. So around 4 or 5 months ago, we were at the REBA conference, and I was on a stand with my colleague, Jack. And the amount of people that just walk by and they maybe take a glance at Champion, some people would come over, but they knew that we were there to be able to tell them about our products and solve their problem, and being able to then demo it to them in the future. And we were quite stressed, I'll be quite honest, that people weren't coming over, people were being quite rude. And the moment that we turned it into a game whereby we said, okay, the person that gets the most amount of people to ignore us after saying, hello, how are you, wins, and they win a meal out on the other person, for example. Not only did this lead to higher performance, first of all, so we increased the amount of leads that we got by 500%. It made it fun. It made the day enjoyable. And that was just one way that we looked to make work fun. And it didn't really change the working day. It actually led to it being a lot more enjoyable and a lot more productive as well. So if there are ways that we can just get a little bit of laughter into our meetings, it decreases stress, it improves productivity. You can do it in your own unique way as well. It's something that we've got a Wordle channel, for example, in Champion for those that do Wordle, and we have a laugh when I can't even get it in 6 times, for example. Small things like that are really important to being able to build the right culture. Now, I mentioned Simon Sinek, and many of you as leaders will be aware of Simon Sinek, and you may be aware of this graph as well. And when he spoke to the Navy SEALs, arguably the highest performing organization, and that's what we want within our organizations, it's high performance. He asked them, what does high performance really mean? And what they said is they drew this graph. On the left-hand side, there's performance. On the bottom, there is trust. And you, of course, want to stay away from the low performance, low trust. But Simon Sinek asked them a question of, would you rather have high performance, low trust, or moderate performance and high trust? And they said every single day of the week, it's moderate performance and high trust. Of course, you want it in the top right, but they would actually say people that may be high performers, it might be in the sales department within our organizations, for example, that's a really important thing, is that the trust is the most important factor. The performance will then follow across the team. And one person that may actually be not conducive to a healthy culture. Even if they are the top employee hitting their targets, for example, that high performance can lead to low performance for other people and can really spread across the organization very quickly and impact other people. So look at high trust, and that's a really important thing within here. Again, will have a huge impact upon not only mental health and well-being, but also performance across the organization and our culture. The next area is around listening, and there's a quote here around listen intently and you rarely have to think. Of course we do think, but many times if we listen, the answer is there in front of us, and listening to our team and the boots on the ground. Of course, we want to use active and reflective listening when it comes to our team, and that's a really powerful thing, again, to being able to understand what the challenges are for people that they are facing. And so again, we can tailor things to the team, and often they do know best when it comes to a lot of these areas. And so if we can have listening sessions, focus groups, even semi-structured interviews, for example, that's a really powerful thing going forwards. And this is something that I've learned along the way across the last 8 years, is that the culture is only as strong as the most disengaged person. So if we can really work on making the most disengaged people within our organizations believing in us, believing in the mission, all going in the same direction, that's when the culture really starts to ramp up. Now, if you are really supporting those people and they're still not on the train with you, there may be hard decisions that have to be made. And sometimes those hard decisions can lead to a better culture going forwards for other people that really believe in the culture that we're going through. And so sometimes there will be hard decisions within here, but we want to do everything we can do to get the disengaged engaged. And so we're all going in the same direction. And so all of this will have an influence on our mental health. So now let's go on to mental health specifically in the workplace. So we talked about the culture piece and how important that is, the 9 lessons that we can take away. And now let's go on to specifically mental health in the workplace. So many of you are very knowledgeable when it comes to mental health, and I'm sure you're aware that it lies on a continuum that changes hourly, weekly, all the way through to monthly and yearly. And so on the right-hand side, this is really where our goal is to be. So we want to be thriving, content on a daily basis, but inevitably we will at time to time be struggling, occasionally in crisis, and that's somewhere that I've been personally, and many people may have faced as well. But the goal is to have as many days on the right-hand side of this continuum, simply speaking, at the moment. So when it looks at thriving, there's high motivation, ability to relax, fulfilling potential, solution-focused, able to cope with change, through to struggling, which is low self-esteem, through to trouble sleeping, for example, are some of the indications within here. So that's one focus point, that even if we do have a mental health diagnosis, even if we are struggling at one point, there is hope ahead and we can get ourselves into that position of being content or being thriving. But also if we are in that position, we're not then immune to struggling the day after, for example. That's how our mental health fluctuates, and it's the most important thing that we need to nourish. And when it comes to workplace mental health, of course, we bring anxieties from outside of work into work. We bring things, whether that's divorce, as I mentioned earlier, it might be bereavement and grief that many of us will face and may be facing right now. It could be financial difficulties, especially with the cost of living rising. Again, as leaders, the more we can understand that and the more we can be really in touch with our team, the more powerful our mental health and wellbeing strategy will be in supporting our team. But this is one of the most important slides within the deck today, is what is your role in supporting mental health? And I've spoken to many leaders recently and line managers, and they place a lot of stress and pressure on their role, and they felt that they needed to diagnose and they needed to try and treat and help people that were really struggling with their mental health. And actually, that isn't the role that we have within our organizations. What we're there to do is to support, first of all, to signpost if people are struggling, and I'll share with you where we can signpost, and to listen. Now, when I struggled with my mental health 8 to 9 years ago, the thing that made the biggest difference wasn't someone diagnosing me. It wasn't someone trying to fix the problems that I was having. It was someone that was just listening to me. And that was really powerful. And my tutor, Dr. Andy Daly-Smith, I've got a lot to owe for that. So our role is to look to nourish people's mental well-being through the culture piece that we've mentioned, to signpost, to listen, and to support. Now, our role isn't to diagnose, to treat, to be a psychotherapist or GP. To be a GP, it takes 7 years to qualify and a little bit longer to then gain the experience to then get your badge specifically. And we will leave that to the experts. And that's really important, that we want to check in with people and being able to listen, to have those conversations. And we'll go through how we can do that in a moment. But our role isn't there to be a psychotherapist, to offer counselling. And that's a really important thing to recognise going forwards. So the goal and the objective for every organisation when it comes to mental health and well-being is to get as many people flourishing and reaching their full potential as human beings. And the way we can do that is through prevention and early intervention. Now, if we look at the general landscape when it comes to well-being across the last 15, 20 years, up until recently, the focus has been reactive, and potentially when it's too late, that there's been stresses, strains piled upon people. They've not felt like they could speak. They've not communicated their struggles because of the fear of the stigma. And that's led to them then 6 months further down the line being off on long-term sick. Again, the focus now is that communication piece that we've mentioned, breaking the stigma through amazing awareness days such as, or awareness weeks such as this week, and preventing people from struggling, really enabling them to flourish, and that early intervention piece, because we can't always prevent 100% of mental health issues from occurring, as we are only human. So when it comes to the warning signs of poor mental health, and it's important to note that stress is actually a positive thing for many of us. I'm slightly stressed now because I want to perform. I want to deliver a lot of value to you as the audience that have taken out 45 minutes to an hour within your working day. Stress actually gets us up out of bed, and it's a really important thing. When stress is long-term and chronic, that's when it can lead to mental health issues and challenges such as anxiety and depression. And the warning signs of stress can look at anything from irrational behaviour through to low concentration, irritability, and these may be things that we've faced as individuals within here. Similarly, with anxiety, there's a lot of links with stress as well. So tense, nervous, thoughts racing, and through to depression. It's much more than low mood within here. It's hopelessness, it's inability to concentrate, all the way through to links into insomnia and poor sleep, for example. But this is a lot to remember for today's session. I won't be able to memorize all of these things. The one thing, when I spoke to a clinical psychologist at the University of Sheffield, and this was advice that has stuck with me ever since, he said the real warning sign, okay, there's all of those warning signs. The real warning sign is that if something doesn't feel right, it often isn't. So if someone's just changing their behavior, for example, not acting in accordance with how they normally behave, they might be turning up late, not looking after themselves. If something in your gut is saying, is this person okay? This is when we can then go through the class approach. So again, this has been devised by world-leading academics from the University of Sheffield. And the class approach is an acronym that stands for Connect, Listen, Assess, Support, and Signpost. So this is a step-by-step process that you can go through, and you can take this outside of the workplace for your friends, for your family, as well as for your colleagues and for the rest of your team to share with them as well. So let's say that something's not right and my gut feeling is saying, okay, James is really just not quite acting the normal way that he would. I would look to connect with him. And so I'd say, James, is everything okay? And James may say, everything's fine. It's a very common thing then for the conversation to go elsewhere. What we really want to do then is ask twice. And that's a very powerful thing, something that's impacted me firsthand and directly, my tutor asking me twice. That gave me the permission then to start to open up. I personally broke down at that point, and my tutor was incredible. Again, what he didn't do was try and fix the problem. All he did was listen and ask open-ended questions. Looking back at it now, he repeated the last few words of what I said. So if I said, I'm feeling a huge amount of pressure, workload's too high, and he go, workloads are too high, is there anything more you can share on that? I felt listened to. I then opened up more, and it just honestly lifted the world, the weight of the world off my shoulders. And that's a phrase that many people have used. Even Ben Stokes, one of the world's best cricketers, has come out to mention that in the last 2 days. So connecting with them initially, asking that question and asking twice. They may connect with you and say, look, I'm really struggling at the moment. Then we look to listen and listen intently and make sure that the body language is absolutely spot on to show that we're engaged. We're not looking out of the window and not looking at them and not looking disinterested. We're really interested in them as people, and we're there, and we've got their full focus, and you've got the full focus on them. At that point, we then look to assess the situation, and is this person safe to be on their own, first of all? If they're not safe to be on their own, you want to then support them, and you want to stay with them. And that's a really important thing. If you are concerned about their own individual safety, do not be afraid to ask the question of, are you experiencing suicidal thoughts? Again, a really hard question to ask within here. But the research again shows that it doesn't put the thought in people's minds. It does exactly the opposite. It shows again a level of empathy, and they may go, no, I'm not at all. Or they may go, I may be struggling. And again, we'll go through the signposting in a moment's time within there. So assess the situation. Are they safe to be on their own? And most of the time, the vast majority of the time, they absolutely are. They just need an ear to be able to talk to. What we then want to do is to look to support them. And it's really important to not just support during the conversation, but also support afterwards as well. And it's very easy to support during the conversation and say, I'm here for you. Afterwards is the really key bit. And that's what, again, from a personal perspective, was very powerful for me, is that my tutor checked in on me the day after, checked in on me the week after, and then the month after that as well. So it wasn't every single day, for example. He just said, Harry, just wanted to check in following our previous conversation, just to see how you're doing and to see if you have gone to speak to the GP as well. That just made me feel really understood. He then truly cared about me. And again, that theme of being human, being authentic, being empathetic is really important within here. And he showed a huge level of compassion. And that's what we really want to do, again, as the best possible leaders within our organization. So support during and support after the conversation. And the final area is around signposting. And so this is for the UK only, and we'll also send through to you following today's session global signposting resources that are being built by Champion Health and the charities globally that are doing incredible work. But you may want to recommend going to that for them to go to visit a healthcare professional if they've not had a diagnosis and it's impacting their daily lives. For other people, they may not need to be signposted, and that's really important to note as well. They may just need to have reasonable adjustments within the workplace that we can make for them to make sure that we're building the right environment, the right culture for them to thrive during this period. Now, your organization's most likely to have an EAP as well. Again, as leaders, you'll be aware of a lot of this. And also, if again, you're in the UK, you can access NHS therapies. Just Google IAPT or NHS therapies. You can type in your postcode and then you're able to then access them there. So again, we'll share the global signposting at the end of today's session following it too. When it comes to signposting as well, what we don't want to do is tell them. What we want to do is for something to be collaborative within here as well. And so we go, have you thought about going to see your GP rather than you need to go and see your GP? From a human level, that then enables the individual to make their own decision, their own choice. They're much more likely to do it as well. So that's just one tip from motivational interviewing that can be very powerful within there. So just to recap that, connect, listen, assess, support, signpost. We've had feedback within the last few months that this has been life-changing for many people that have gone through this process. And hopefully we've made something very digestible that can be very challenging, first of all, and we can have the tricky conversations that can be very powerful within our organizations. Again, this is something that we deliver hour-long sessions on, and so we can deliver that within your organization if you'd like a bit more depth within there. Now, one thing that I wanted to touch upon, and again, speaking to people like you, on what you wanted to achieve from today's session, it was around how we can role model effectively and look after our own mental well-being under the pressure that we face as leaders and line managers. And so the first thing is that we need to show our vulnerabilities. If you are an employee, let's say a receptionist, for example, are you going to open up to your line manager or to a leader within the organization if they are always fine and if they're almost quite robotic within their day-to-day lives? You're much more likely to bring your whole self to work, to open up and to share your vulnerabilities with people if you see the human side of them as well. So some of the most powerful wellbeing interventions have been free of charge, with the likes of global banks from HSBC to Lloyds, whereby the CEOs have shared their own personal stories. That's then shown that they're human, they're not robots within here. And that again is given permission to people to being able to open up and to know that there's not stigma. If the person right at the very top of the organization is saying this, then that enables me to feel this way. And accepting feelings is a really important thing when it comes to our own mental well-being, not just fighting those feelings. I really can't stand terms like beating depression. We don't beat depression, we look to work through it. And we need to accept those feelings to be able to get out through to the other side. And the second thing is we are role models. People look up to us whether we like it or not. And that's the fact as a leader, people do look up to us within our positions. And we need to act in accordance of how you would like others to act. Again, it's that consistency piece. If you're saying something and you're not acting upon it, people have full right to then call you out on it. Or actually, it might be down at the pub with their colleagues that they're saying this isn't right. And that's when the culture can start to really erode. So if you can act in accordance with what you're saying and how you'd like others to act, role model those healthy behaviors when it comes to your well-being and also performance and everything that you look to do in terms of communications, that's really powerful when it comes to your team as well going forwards. So the fourth and final area of today's keynote now goes on to supporting your own mental health as a leader. So this will take around 5 minutes to go through again, and then we'll go on to the Q&A. So if anyone has any questions, just pop them in the chat. You can either send them to me personally or to the whole group, and we will go through those in a minute's time. So the first thing to recognize is that it has been incredibly tough across the last few years, and we've been fighting fires, whether that's supporting our family, supporting our friends, supporting our team. It's really important now that we look to really support ourselves, because if we don't support ourselves, it's very hard to be the best leader that we can be and to look out for and look after the people around us. So Champion Health, again, alongside our academics, devised a 9-step process to optimizing your mental well-being from the research that's out there. So the Champions Framework, again, is another acronym. We love an acronym at Champion Health. Alex has just posted a link to the more around the Champions Framework. But it stands for, the first letter is connect. It's exactly the same as the class approach, that we need to connect with people around us. Now, when I was struggling with my mental health, I didn't connect with people early on enough. And when I opened up, that had huge levels of impact on me as an individual. And we are social beings as human beings. We're not meant to be built for isolation and what we've factored in the last couple of years. If we can connect with our friends, connect with our family, connect with our colleagues, whilst our mental well-being as well, or maybe whilst we're struggling, that's a really powerful thing to being able to support our own mental well-being. Now, the second letter is H for hydrate. And this is something that's often ignored. And research from Harvard has shown that decreases in hydration have led to decreases in the size of the brain. And the neuroplasticity means the shape of the brain can change very quickly. And brain cells quite literally can die off if we're dehydrated, which increases the risk of things such as anxiety and depression. On the flip side, neurogenesis can occur, whereby growth of new brain cells, and that's when we're hydrated and doing all of the other things within here. So a really easy tip is to have just a glass of water next to you. Make sure that it's always filled throughout the working day, and that can have a huge impact upon your mental well-being, something that's really simple that can often be overlooked within our busy days. The A is around being active, and that's something that's really important for me as an individual, is to be as active as possible. So I look to take a break every single hour with a 5 to 10 minute walk. I'm lucky that I live in a fairly leafy suburb in Sheffield, and the sun's shining for once as well. But even if we just get up away from our desks, or if we're at a workstation, just walk around, make sure that we're stretching our limbs and not in the same posture throughout the day. That's really important as well. And physical activity releases endorphins, which again correlate with positive levels of well-being. So A stands for being active. M is around being mindful. And being mindful is really living in the present moment. So whether we're delivering a big sales pitch, for example, or we've got a one-to-one with our CEO, whatever that looks like, being mindful is absolutely vital. And on the flip side, if we're anxious, we're often future focused and worried about what's going to happen in the future, whether that's realistic or not. If we are experiencing periods of depression, that's often focused around the past and dwelling on our thoughts, on our feelings, what's happened. And so being mindful is being in the present moment. The practice of mindfulness is hugely powerful as well. And if you've got access to the Champion app, that's something that we really look to support you with, is that area of mindfulness within there. So just be in the present moment, try not to get too carried away in the future or the past. And it's a lot easier said than done, I know, but the more present that we can be, the better family members, the better friends, and the better colleagues we will be throughout our lives. P is around being proactive, and you've heard me say proactive many times. And so be proactive, not reactive, when it comes to your mental well-being. So you may be in a really good place at the moment. How can we keep it that way? And that's absolutely vital, all the way through to, if we are struggling, how can we be proactive about it at that stage, and then seek interventions, call our EAP, or talk to someone about it within our organization. I stands for information, and this is quite a unique one that's come out of the research in the last few years, that these devices that are pinging off all the time, the notifications from the news, for example, all the way through to social media, it's having a huge impact on our mental well-being, especially with things that are going on in the world and geopolitical wars that are happening, through to the news on COVID. There are so many things that we aren't designed as humans to take in all of this information as regularly as we are. So look to just draw boundaries between the level of information that you're taking in. Of course, we want to be informed, but too much information, and also from the wrong sources, can really have a huge impact upon our mental well-being. Again, as leaders and line managers, we've got enough on our plate without all of the fake news that's out there and all of the influencers that may be pushing the wrong messages and making us feel not great about ourselves. So O is then being open, be willing to talk about yours and other people's mental health. It's something that has been a huge shift in the last 5 years, and I'm proud to be a part of that movement as well. And I'm sure you are from your standpoint too. Eroding that stigma is really important, and look to talk about our mental health as if we do around our physical health. N is around nutrition, and again, increasing levels of research between the gut and the brain. And so what we eat is very linked to how we feel, how we act, how we behave. And so if we can eat the rainbow, my 7-year-old nephew said, does that mean I can have Starburst and Skittles? So it doesn't mean that, unfortunately, but a sense of humour is important as well. But the fresher the food, the quicker it goes off, generally the healthier it is for us. And the more fibre that we can have, generally in fruits and vegetables, the healthier that is for our brains. So whilst we've looked at nutrition from a physical standpoint for a long period of time, mainly because of the marketing that's out there within the food companies, we now need to look at it from a mental health angle as well. And the final letter, I say it's the most important one for me, is around sleep. And sleep is absolutely vital to being able to restore our bodily functions and our brain for the next day of work, or for whatever it is that we're doing in the next day. We know that sleep correlates with high performance, it correlates with mental health, but it also correlates with our physical health. That poor nights of sleep and less than 6 hours of sleep on a daily basis correlates with heart attacks, for example. You're 5 times at more risk. So look to really double down on your sleep, build healthy sleep habits. Make sure you don't put too much pressure on your sleep, though, to get to sleep. But if we can build those habits, good sleep hygiene can have a huge impact on our mental well-being and our decision making. And then finally, if we are struggling, and as leaders, we aren't immune to struggling from time to time. I've struggled in the last 4 years from time to time, when even being the CEO of Champion Health. We need to look after ourselves, first of all, through the Champions framework. So connect, hydrate, be active, be mindful, be proactive, seek the right level of information, be open, eat well, and then sleep well. We also want to talk openly about our mental health, and it's very powerful for other people as well as ourselves. And visit a professional if you do need to as well. And I'm not ashamed to mention that I have accessed therapy across the last few years as well. It's something that's really powerful for us, and we want to draw a correlate between accessing the likes of our GP or a doctor to accessing a psychotherapist going forwards. Just like we might with a personal trainer, for instance, we want to be able to utilize therapy in a really healthy way across society going forwards. So to end and to summarize today's session, before we do go on to the Q&A, you play a huge role in supporting and being a role model across your organization when it comes to mental health. And the culture is absolutely paramount. Almost you shouldn't really need well-being people within your organization if you get the culture piece right. And so look to really combine those two things in culture and well-being. That will then lead to performance and productivity off the back of it. So you play a hugely important role in your role modeling. Take care of yourself. It's very hard to take care of the people and be the best leader that you can be if you're not doing that. Be the leader that your teacher was. A really useful exercise. I thought it was really useful from my end as well. All of our research was very similar to your answers around psychological safety, around feelings of belonging, being interested in you. And the flip side was being judgmental, all of those other areas. So that contract that you've written down, if that's just the one thing that you do today, try and be the best leader that your teacher was to you. Culture is absolutely paramount, and communication must be consistent going forwards as well. That's where a lot of people lose trust within the organization. And we mentioned trust earlier on. Be very honest and open in terms of your communications. That way you will get people on board. And if they do disagree with the decision, give them the justifications and the rationale, because employees can't always be privy to 100% of the information. But if you can share some of that justification, that's a really important thing for engaging them in the company and in the culture. Now, the goal is for people to flourish and people to really look to fulfill their potential when it comes to not only their performance, productivity, but mental health. So look at prevention and early intervention as the key to mental health support at work. And finally, make sure you take care of your own mental health. No matter where you are on that continuum that changes on a daily basis, look to really look after your own mental health going forwards. So thank you so much for joining today's session. I'll stop the sharing the screen in a moment's time, but some huge news for Champion Health as well. We're really excited to what this means for us as a team, us as a group, but also for you as members and part of this community going forwards. So our vision remains the same: to make healthier easier for everyone, to make it more accessible, more inclusive and more engaging. I look forward to taking any questions that you may have, or even if they're just comments on what you found useful or anything you'd like to see going forwards. I would love to hear from you. Thank you very much. So thank you, Raquel. Thank you, Charlie, Vicky. Excellent. Thank you, Russell, Sean. Adam, you've got a question. Fantastic. So you mentioned you have learnt along the way, and this has been amazing with all the learning. Question: what would be your top 3 things that you would do in a new role as a CEO service manager? The first thing is to connect with the people. I think that's a really important thing. Make sure you're there on a human level, you're connecting with them, they understand you, you understand them. That then takes me then into the communications. Communicate what you expect of them, but also what they should expect of you. Too often within organizations, I find that there's a contract from the employer to the employee. But actually now, if we can have a contract from the employee to the employer of what they should expect from you as a leader, something that Champion Health have done, really powerful. It holds me accountable as much as anything. So that's something that I'd share with you in setting those expectations as well. So there are a couple of things that I would share with. And I hope this means that you've landed a new role or a dream job as well. Anne-Marie, love the class approach. It's amazing, isn't it? I think it's just a fantastic thing to simplify something that's extremely challenging in being able to talk to people about their mental well-being. So hopefully we've made it in a digestible way that can be really impactful for you, and to also ease any anxieties that we may have going into those conversations. Thank you, Sarah, Vicky, Madri, Mark as well. Thank you very much, Will. So 2 questions in the Q&A function as well. So how do you measure EQ is one of the questions. What a fantastic question that is. So very challenging, first of all. That's really what Champion Health do, without a shameless plug, in our platform. So we look to measure levels of well-being, levels of emotional intelligence, mental well-being within there, and produce reports for the individual, first of all, that are all based upon algorithms built by world-leading academics, but also producing anonymized analytics for the senior leadership team. So you can't identify Steve from Paul, but what you will be able to do is go, okay, this is where the team may be struggling within. We can then build a well-being strategy around that. So it's a very hard thing to measure, but that's something that we're looking to tackle going forwards. A lot of EQ as well, just to mention, is around feel as well. So do people clearly communicate, for example? Are people actually shooting people down and getting on top of people? So that is a harder thing to measure. And so you do need to be able to get the right people and the right leaders in the space within the organization that have a high level of EQ and value EQ as something that's very important. We've got another question as well. So hi, Harry, great session. Thank you. Just going back to your slide covering culture, well-being and performance, how are you seeing organizations and leaders within managing the potential mental health challenges, do more with less, faster, focus poses to today's workforce? Now, workload is the main citer of work-related stress. So that's something that we need to acknowledge within our organizations, and we can't sweep under the carpet. The great resignation is occurring, whether we like it or not, within many organizations that have that approach. Many people are leaving. That's leading to more gaps, more people leaving, harder to recruit. And so my focus would be do what you can to really double down on supporting colleagues with workload. Listen to them, first of all, because many of the times, and that goes back to one of my earlier slides, they've got some great ideas of how things can be streamlined. Look to automate where possible as well to support your team so they can focus on the real challenges that humans are great at, and technology can automate a lot of the things. You can see Alex from Champion at the top of the screen. That's what Alex is incredible at. And so the do more with less is a very, very challenging thing. It's very singular to each organization and what challenges you're facing. But what I would encourage is you have open dialogue with the team. You look to talk to them around the challenges, what they are, and you may need to adjust the goalposts, because if we are just building burnout cultures, that's no good for the organization as well as our people. So tricky question, in a way, really good question to answer off the cuff. But I think communication is absolutely vital, listening to our team and then making realistic plans for them going forwards. We've got another question as well. What is your advice to managers when workloads are high and their pressures are on the teams to deliver? Very similar as well in terms of that. And within any organization, within Champion Health as well, we do have KPIs. We've got a senior leadership team and a board that we do report back into. And naturally, there are pressures and stresses within the organization. What I'll do, Louise, is share with you the things that I do. So again, it's communication with the team. We have monthly one-to-ones that are reported back into me. And so I can start to understand, okay, there's a bit of a pressure point here, there's a bottleneck here. And we also do include the team in that decision-making process because they really know what they're experiencing more than I do. And that's absolutely vital to building that psychological safety, give them a fair amount of autonomy within there. And that reporting back then makes me realize, okay, we need to hire in these departments, or actually we might need to adjust the goalposts in terms of the KPIs that we're reporting back into the board. But there is no single answer when it comes to workloads and pressures on the team to deliver. It is the highest stress and pressure for a reason, and it is something that's very hard to be able to tackle. And it will, especially within a global organization such as yours, it is really a case-by-case basis. We've got a few more comments as well that I'm reading within here. Anne-Marie's mentioned that she'll share the class approach for mental health first aiders. That's wonderful to hear. Sarah's mentioned, how do you approach death, dying and loss, which has affected so many people, particularly over the COVID period? And I think it's a really important question and one to not shy away from. Many people, including myself, will have gone through a grieving process within our working lives. And it's absolutely vital that we have the right policies and procedures, first of all, from the organisational level. We then need to look, and this is basically the wellbeing onion. So you've got the organisational level, get the right policies and processes, first of all. Then in the line manager level and that interpersonal level, we need to make sure line managers are trained in emotional intelligence and how to have those conversations, what kind of questions to ask and how to intently listen. And we rarely have training sessions on listening, but it's probably the most important skill that we can have as line managers. And then make sure on the individual level, that core part of the onion that makes me cry, we make sure that we communicate that to our teams in terms of, if you are going through this process, this is what the company has in terms of interventions and support, but this is also the policy and process that you can go through, and making that really clear, whether that's through an intranet channel, whether that's through a video that I mentioned previously, making those communications clear. This is the key bit that I can't emphasize enough. Make sure that it's consistent then all the way through. So the policies and processes are then acted upon, as that's when you can lose people within. So again, Sarah, we could do a whole session on going through grief and supporting people, and also going through your own personal grief as well. But hopefully that gives you a couple of tips within there. Now, I'm conscious of time within here, so I will go through each of the questions following this session. But again, this has been another incredible session. I feel just incredibly privileged to have delivered today. The chat function, I just love seeing it popping off, and it makes me feel less lonely as well, delivering this session on my own. So hopefully, as I say, there's one thing that you could have taken away from today's session, and I hope you're really excited about what's going on at Champion and what we can do going forwards together. Have a wonderful day and rest of your day. It might be the evening in some places as well, so have a good night as well, and I'll see you on the next session. Goodbye.